So Sarah has been speaking, training, and consulting with Fortune 500 companies since 2004. Sarah's work enables teams to have conversations that matter. These conversations, in turn, translate to increased employee engagement, effectiveness, and bottom line return, along with greater community impact. Today, Sarah's going to walk us through a piece of generations, specifically talking about the impact generations have on customers, clients, and employees. So Sarah, welcome.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Glad to be here virtually with you. Welcome to, I would say, the new world, but it's not new. We've been doing this for 6 months already. And I was joking around with Kristen earlier because this morning I saw a giant cable truck like drive by with big wires and tubes. And I thought this is going to happen exactly in this moment where they're going to decide to install new lines in front of our house. But they kept going. So that's good news. They parked and paused and then they kept moving. So just excited to be able to be here with you today. We're going to be talking about this generational piece. And this is not a new topic. I have been talking about generations for 15 years and thinking that it will go away. Like eventually this is going to go away. It just gets bigger and we add more generations and it becomes more complex. So we'll be talking about some high level pieces as well as digging into some beliefs and background pieces on each of these generational components. And it's an hour, so it's super fast. There's a lot to talk about, but as we get going, I want to encourage you to keep your fingers moving in the chat box. If we were sitting live next to each other, somebody would lean over and whisper something, and any of those comments, put those in the chat box, and Kristen will be monitoring that. I'll keep an eye on it as well. We'll pause, we'll take questions from there. So if you have questions, put them in there. If you have questions and you just want to talk, like raise your hand, either literally or you can raise your hand through the buttons down below on your screen. You're able to do that. Cameras are optional. We get that it's not always easy to have a camera available, but I encourage you to turn it on. This is the new world where we get to see each other and interact. And I used to be super nervous, like, oh my goodness, like how is this going to look and what is it going to look like? And I've really just kind of gotten over that because otherwise we don't get to see other people. So I love being able to see folks as much as possible. We're going to do what's called the 20-20-20. So every 20 minutes or so, we're going to take a 20-second break. We're going to look away so that our eyes get a pause and a break in this piece because Zoom fatigue is real. And so that will help us. I'll give you some thought questions and you can think about something and take a chance to look away for a little bit. So I've got a couple of those added into this. It's going to be interactive, so we've got a couple of polls going on, so you can either do that on your screen or on your phones, and I'll explain that as we go. And then again, ask questions, make comments, share your expertise. I know a lot about the generations. I don't know everything, and I don't know your experiences. So whatever we can build into this, I'm very grateful for the chance to interact. So with that, geezer, punk, whatever, bridging the generational divide. And even the title sometimes is a little sticky for people. I've worked with a lot of groups like, can we just not say that? Sure, we can not say that. We can just talk about bridging the generational divide, but it's just fun. It's fun to be able to just start thinking and going, yeah, maybe there are some stereotypes we should address in this. What does that look like? And ultimately, whatever your generation, we're all in this for the same thing. We're trying to make our businesses succeed. So it doesn't matter what your generation is. And we're going to kick off with this piece, which is a word that I love. It's the word cleave, and it's a strange word because maybe from like 4th grade, you remember antonyms and synonyms. Antonyms have opposite meanings, synonyms are similar. This is a contronym, which means it has 2 meanings inside of it that are like exact opposites. So it means to unite to something, like a rock climber cleaves to the side of a cliff, or like a meat cleaver, it cleaves things apart, it divides. And I think that this generational piece does that for us. It either unites us together or it divides us apart. And I want us to be thinking today, instead of this generational piece dividing us and us, typecasting or saying, all this generation does this, I want us to think about what we all want and how we can focus together, how we can unite together around this topic. So that'll be an overarching theme that we discuss. So we're going to do our first set of polling pieces here. So if you've got your phone, if you want to participate, what you do is you go into your text messages, in where the phone number is, you type in 37607, and then for the text, it's Sarah Gibson 307. That'll give you access. If you don't have a phone, you can log in on your web browser. It's pollev.com/Sarah Gibson 307. So that's the hardest thing that we do in this moment, is kind of get everybody logged in. And I'm going to give you a quote, and I want you to be thinking about who said this, and then you'll get some options out on your phone. So give me a quick wave if you've been able to get into that yet. Got a couple hands. Thank you. Takes just a minute to get everybody logged in. And once you're logged in, we'll use this several times today, so you'll see that. All right, thank you, Larry. Good, thank you, Francis and Vicki. Aaron, thumbs up, love that. All right, thank you, Kristen. All right, so you'll see this address pop up again. Thank you, Laura, for that, letting me know. You're gonna see the address pop up again when the question comes up. So if you're still waiting to log in, it'll get there. Kyle, you doing okay? Soon, okay. I know this is the hardest part we do. All right, so we're gonna poll. Here's your quote, and I want you to be thinking about who said this, and then your options will come up on the phone. So the young people of today think of nothing but themselves. They have no reverence for parents or old age. They're impatient of all restraint. They talk as if they alone knew everything, and what passes for wisdom with us is foolishness with them. As for girls, they are forward, immodest, and unwomanly in speech, behavior, and dress. So out of our options, who said that? Was it Abraham Lincoln? Was it FDR? Was it Socrates? Or was it my grandfather? Who said it? Got one vote out there. We got votes coming in for FDR and Socrates. Abraham Lincoln, my grandfather, yep.
This is cool.
It's fun to see, right? Thank you, Tara. There's a little bit of delay, so I'll make sure everybody's gotten a chance to respond. All right, overwhelming vote right there. Looks like it's for FDR. That's a really good guess. It sounds like something FDR would say. Sounds like something Abraham Lincoln would say, or my grandfather. The actual answer is Socrates. Socrates said this. This is 400 BC. So generational differences have existed since generations existed. Every time a generation pops in, like we look down at the next group and go, like, they don't get it. They don't get it. So this is not a new thing for us on that front. So as we explore something that's not a new topic, but that is impacting us, we're going to talk about generational impacts, generational characteristics, then and now, like what was work like then, what is it like now, and then what now and what next, what's coming up with these generations. So that's our game plan for the morning. As we think about generations, here's how generations impact us. They impact us how we research and market our services. Generations impact how we use language and what we focus on within our businesses. And it also impacts which services and businesses survive and thrive. And I have a picture there of Bounty napkins, because napkins are going away. And if that's new to you or news to you, what we have found and what research has found is that younger people don't actually use napkins in the same way that we do. They use paper towel, and because paper towel come in those little tear-off sheets that are smaller, they're more likely to have that in their home than they are napkins, because it would be wasteful to have two products that do the same thing. And so it's just interesting to think that each generation brings in their own perspective on these components. You're like, oh, all right, like that product's actually going away. We've seen things like newspapers go away. That makes sense to us, and it's gone online, or we've seen other things. But given today's environment, both with COVID as well as school and all the things going on, we're seeing new products and we're also seeing changes in those products. The language we use, what we focus on changes. Advertising today, highly focused on the safety and security of being in their location. It's really strange for us at this point to see a commercial where somebody doesn't have a mask on, because you're like, ooh, that there's something in us that mentally goes, that's kind of odd. Everybody should have a mask. And so that generational piece will definitely impact and play out with the next group. Another thing to just think about is today's generations are influencing lots of things, like how they rate us online. There's all kinds of pieces where they watch and read online reviews, and it becomes really important. So if you are a company and you interact with the public, encouraging your raving fans to go out and put something on Yelp about you is really important, or other social pieces where they can rate you online. You want your raving fans out there. Otherwise, it's gonna be the people who complain. So we have to always be thinking about how did the generations use this knowledge with our companies. These generations want tech savvy and smart companies. They want to evaluate company culture before they engage. So there's a lot of younger people in particular that are watching those company culture pieces and going, actually, I'm not going to go to that spot because I've heard this in the news about that group. They're evaluating how people treat one another, how they treat the public, how they engage with their communities. Those are all things that are really important to these generations. And we're seeing that generational piece impacting us. And I love that Kristen said there's no napkins in her house. Confirming that. Awesome. So as businesses, what do we need to do? We need to be flexible. We need to be aware of the changes. We need to ask each generation what they need and want. And then we're going to figure out, like, how do we adapt best? Because it's not just about one generation. It's about bridging the divide and finding what we have in common in this realm. So that's our overview. That gives us just a little high level piece of the impacts. I'm going to pause. What questions or thoughts do you have initially?
I think we're almost out of napkins, so we're going to try the paper towels since I've got a high schooler and a middle schooler and see how that goes.
I love it, Kyle. Maybe it'll actually be better. I don't know. Kristen, you had a thought.
Nope, go ahead, Kristen.
Two Kristens, sorry.
Kristen.
Yes, Kristen from Findorf.
Just one, I guess, I don't know if it's a question or a thought, but it's interesting because I feel like I hear this topic a lot, and as leaders, we're always looking to adapt for the different generations, but I'm just curious how we also train them to adapt to the rest of us, because that feels like it's certainly a struggle as well.
Absolutely. So there's this piece, especially when we're talking external markets, it's about us adapting in a lot of realms. Like we're serving our customers, we're serving our clients. Internally, that becomes a little bit trickier because there is this component of like, actually, we need you to be able to make phone calls. We need you to be able to do this. And so I talk about in longer sessions about non-negotiables and highlighting what are non-negotiables as a business that we're communicating to all employees. And whatever that culture piece is that we want to carry forward, those are the components that we stress. And there are things that are non-negotiable. You have to be here for your shift. You have to be, there's things that have to happen. But you can't have 1,500 non-negotiables or all of them lose their value on that front. So good thought, good question. Good. I see a good question from Mick out there. Biggest influences, we're coming to that, so hang in there. And then just a couple other comments out there. Good, thanks. Any other questions or thoughts? Yeah, Tara.
You might cover this a little bit later, but technology usage in the workplace, like cell phone usage, things like that.
Perfect. Let's make sure that we cover that as planned, but make sure I do that. Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah, and I would also add that second bullet is to me the most important because you have to have those conversations to learn.
Good. Yeah, thank you, Larry. You've got to ask those conversations to learn. Good. Cell phone usage. And a question from Dave. Why do businesses seem to take so long to make these adaptations? I think that just a quick overall answer to that is change is hard, and we're trying to figure out like which are the pieces we actually need to adapt to and which ones don't we need to adapt to. Some companies are really fast about identifying those, and others are like, actually, we're going to hold off and see what's flavor of the month and what goes away. So Good. All right. Love this. Thank you for your questions and your thoughts. Let's go on to the couple of pieces. I just want to always add this in. What today is not. Today is not a chance to lock you in a box and say, you are this age, therefore you are this way. You only have these behaviors. That's not what this is. It's also not a get out of jail free card where that says, you know, I'm this generation, so I get to behave this way. The more we know, the more we are responsible for our actions on that front. It's also not a magic bullet. It's not going to tell you everything in an hour that you need to know, but it'll give you some good ideas of where to go and what to do. This is based on sociological trends. And one of the questions we had in the chat box was like, so tell me about these things. Like how do these generations come into being? So these are the background pieces. A generation is a cohort of people. It's a group of people who share an experience. A generation is a cohort defined by birth years, typically a 15 to 20 year span. And then what experience they share is called a defining event. It's an event that shapes you from that moment on as a generation moving forward. So if you think about the young people today, they're all going to go, oh yeah, I remember where I was when coronavirus happened, and because of COVID, we all did virtual schooling for 6 months. I remember where I was when. Those are the types of things that are those defining events. For some of us in the room, a defining event may be, I remember where I was when JFK was shot or when man walked on the moon. For some of us, it's, I remember where I was when the Challenger exploded. I remember where I was when O.J. Simpson's white Bronco was cruising down the freeway, or when 9/11 happened. And the difference is we all remember 9/11 and it shaped all of us, but those under the age of 18 had some lasting impacts that are different than those of us who are older. So we'll see that as we kind of build out this topic a little bit. So who are the generations? I want to make sure we've got some baselines here. So World War II folks, Maya Angelou here, ages 75 plus. 75 plus. So parents, grandparents, great-grandparents on that front. Baby boomers are in their mid-50s to their mid-70s. Steve Jobs, classic icon of that generation. We've got some waves out there. And baby boomers went through a whole series of events: sex, drugs, rock and roll, Vietnam, a variety of things that made them more rebellious in general than other generations. So I chose Steve Jobs because he always wore the black turtleneck and the blue jeans and the tennis shoes, something that previous generations wouldn't have done. A rebellion, like, I don't have to dress that way. Then we get to Gen X. They're 40 to mid 50s, and we've got Jimmy Fallon as our icon. And a lot of Gen Xers, like Jimmy Fallon, had to wait for baby boomers to retire in order to step up into the workplace and take on different jobs and roles. So Jimmy Fallon's a classic example there. Millennials are mid 20s through their 30s at this point, and Meghan Markle's on the upper end of that. But classically, millennials have changed our environment in our world, and Meghan Markle and Prince Harry are changing things in our workplace, and not only workplace, but our world on that front. So I chose her. And then Gen Z, they are, we're thinking around 8 is the cutoff age right now, because the coronavirus will be the next defining event for the next generation. So 8 to their mid 20s. And this is Gaten Matarazzo. He is from Stranger Things, which is an online streaming piece through Netflix. And so this generation doesn't know a lot of the classic things that we know, as far as, oh, it was on one of these 3 major broadcast pieces, ABC, NBC, or CBS. They have all kinds of streaming options as part of this generation. So that gives you some guidelines. We pick on millennials a ton, and we're always, I use the word always. I hear a lot, those millennials, anybody under 40 is a millennial. And the reality is there's a couple of generations, and millennial is not a bad word. There's a lot of good things that come from that generation, a ton of good things. So I don't want us to use this as something that divides us, but it's something where we go, oh, we can come together around this. And there is another generation coming up that is in our workforce. So we have to be aware of that. So what makes us different and unique? It's the events we go through. So if you were World War II, you went through the Great Depression, maybe part of the soup line on that front of things. What we know is a characteristic came from that. So when you open the refrigerator door, you see plastic buckets of Cool Whip and sour cream and butter, but it's not Cool Whip, sour cream and butter. It's leftovers on that front. So even though they're 80 years old right now or 90 years old, this characteristic is still traveling with that generation. And that's one of the unique things. It's different than your life stage. It's something that travels with you through time. So a couple of pieces, and then we're going to take a pause. Baby boomers. Here's some things that happen with baby boomers. 80 million of them entered the workforce around the same time. The characteristic is that they are competitive and status driven. Generally, not all of them, right? Generally, competitive and status driven. And the challenge becomes in the workplace that change removes their competitive edge or status. So a lot of us have experienced this lack of knowledge transfer. Like, I've been trying to learn this, but the people in front of me won't share their knowledge with me. There's this generational component of, if I give you my knowledge, you're going to hire somebody younger and cheaper. So why would I do that? Why would I do that? And so that's how it plays out in the workplace. For Gen Xers, the event, they came home to no or little adult supervision. Their characteristic is they're independent and highly self-reliant. And the challenge that we face in the workplace is that they expect independence from their staff and they provide very little feedback. And they'll say to somebody on their staff, like, I talked to you earlier this week. Like, do you need to talk to me twice? Oh, really? Like, you should do this on your own. So that's the challenge on that front. Millennials have parents who said, don't settle. Don't settle until you find your dream job. And the characteristic is they really believe this dream job exists. We didn't tell them that there were crap jobs to get to the dream job. We didn't tell them that. We just said, find your dream job. And so we've seen traditionally a lot of fast track job changes and high expectations. And that's not bad. It simply changes the dynamic in the workplace for us on that front. Then for Gen Z, what we know about them, everything was due at 11:59 p.m. All of their papers, it wasn't due at school when you turned it in. It's 11:59. The characteristic that we're seeing from this group is a really strong lack of urgency. There's a focus on flexible deadlines and flexible service pieces. The challenge is that it can limit our ability to wow with immediacy because, well, as long as I get it in by 11:59, we're good. We're good. So those are how these events and characteristics become challenges for us in the workplace. With that, we're going to take our pause. We're going to do 20 seconds looking away, 20 minutes in, 20 seconds, look 20 feet away, wherever that is for you. And here's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about how do you see these events shaping what you're experiencing in the workplace, whether it's events of today or events you went through. How does that shape your workplace? When we come back, we will hear from two of you on this front. And I'm going to start my timer for 20 seconds. So 20 seconds, looking away. Last 5 seconds here. Feels good to just look away, stretch a little. All right. That's our 20 seconds. So 2 of you, I would love to hear from 2 of you, just kind of what you were thinking there. How do you see these events shaping workplaces? Tara. Tara and then Jim.
One thing, I work for AT&T, and historically, it's been the type of company that you basically have a career for life. And that's really been changing pretty significantly. Most of my peers probably have 30 plus years with the company. We have one person who works for me that's got 42 years. I have 33 years. But what we're finding now, it's a pretty significant shift where the company is basically saying, we're not your career for life. And that's kind of hard for particularly individuals like myself to see that where people coming in are planning to stay for a few years and move on. So it's a pretty big shift in kind of philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Jim. Tara, you had something too.
Yeah, I was just going to say that for me, the coronavirus really helped me or didn't help me, but made me reevaluate my core values in my business and really determine really kind of centralize the future of my company and the people that are in it right now. And I think that a lot of business owners kind of did that as well, sort of realizing that their people are the core and center of their business, and without their people, there is no business. And so I think the compassion and grace that came out of this, hopefully will be something that sustains business owners moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And there's all kinds of things. We could spend a lot of time on all of those comments. Jim, we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Tara, you're right. There's this reevaluation that's happening, just kind of the humanity that has stemmed out of this experience for sure for folks. So yeah, these events definitely shape us. And if you start thinking about, oh yeah, I went through that and here's the result of that, it makes a lot of sense where the generational pieces come into play. So let's talk about, this gets into the technology piece that Tara asked about, the piece that Jim was talking about with career length and path, all of that sort of thing. Let's talk about some norms then and now. And we're going to get into, in addition to that, like the economy and the pieces shaping us right now on this front. So let's talk about attire, career path and length, and then technology. So for me, there's a then and now factor. So I love these two pictures. The picture on the left are my siblings. It's 1962, it's Easter. This is how you dressed. So it was little hats and patent shoes and ties. And my sister has her little purse. I love that. That was attire. That was what you were supposed to wear, and that was what the norm was. Then you look on the right-hand side, and this is our family photo from last year. Our exchange student from Switzerland is in the middle. It's a selfie taken up at Devil's Lake. My mother would have been appalled. Like, you sent this out as your Christmas photo. Like, nobody is dressed up. Like, there's things that she would have just been like, oh, Sarah, on that front. But this is the norm, and this is definitely changing for us with remote work. So just as a curiosity question, how many of you are dressed up on the top side of you, but your bottom half is actually in shorts or yoga pants, or right? If you really think about it, there's a sense that how we dress is being changed even by this remote work piece of things. And so there's changes that happen over time, just naturally, because of all the circumstances around us. Another change that has happened, my add-in is having problems. Well, let's do this manually rather than make this more difficult. I'm curious, how many of you have been at your current job 1 to 3 years? Okay, got a couple of you, 3 of you, okay? How many of you have been at your current job 3 to 5? All right, nobody. How about 5 to 7? We did have a tier of 3 to 5, 5 to 7. 7 to 10? 10 plus. Should be everybody else out there. Excellent, right. It's interesting, if we just think about that amount of time that we've had on the job, that piece that Jim was just talking about, we're seeing people cycle through our work more and more often. And it has a lot to do with a number of things. On average, millennials spend 2 years at a job. Gen Xers spend 5 years. Baby boomers spend 7. And we do see this change just slightly, but it has to do with that idea that a couple of things. The company is not necessarily as loyal to employees as they used to be on that front. In addition to that, opportunities change. A lot of millennials got laid off during this whole process. So it's not that they didn't want to stay, it's that they were laid off with the economy and what changed in March. So we'll see that these numbers will shift a little bit because of all that's happened recently. However, these are the baselines. Larry, thought?
You should know that I was a true baby boomer. I spent 35 years at my previous job before I retired from the DOT.
Nice, perfect, right? 35 years, that's amazing, amazing. Yeah, and now we're doing something new.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So where this comes into play is, remember I talked about Jimmy Fallon having to wait for Jay Leno to retire because all the career ladder pieces were blocked for him. It used to be in our workplaces that we had this definitive path. I start at the beginning. If I'm Jill, I'm in the bank, I start as a teller and I work my way through. Eventually I become a VP or maybe the president of the bank. It was a clear path towards a corner office with a window. That was the intent. Currently, it is a career lattice, and we've really seen this shift for the last 10, 15 years where people go, I'm going to start here, but it makes more sense. Let's use the DOT's example. It makes more sense for me to leave and to become a private employee and then to come back into the DOT because they'll hire me back in at a higher rate because the changing of the bandwidth of the salary has changed or whatever that is. So people take these lateral moves, or they say, I want to start in marketing, but I really find the HR side interesting. So they take this shift, and it's a sideways shift. So when we think about careers, our goal is to keep people within our organization, but not on a set path. So they're going to head over to where they want to head, and developing them is going to be significant on that front. Like, it's going to look different by each person, and it's going to be something unexpected for us a lot of times. So that's one of the major changes generations has brought about. Again, we've got some errors going on here with the technology, but there are skills that transfer across all of these jobs. And for the sake of time, I'm going to highlight a few. So if we think about what we all need in our job, we all need communication skills. We all need the ability to relate to customers. We need problem solving. We need accountability. There's skills that transfer across all of these different jobs. And that's what we're looking for in developing employees across generations. Then we are looking for developing them along a career path. What skills do we need? So in your chat box, I'm going to just have you jot in, like, if you thought about some of those skills that were super important, what skills would you want from every employee? What would be your perfect 1 or 2 skills? So throw those in there and we'll collect those. Yep, interpersonal pieces. Thank you, Dave.
I couldn't type fast enough.
I know.
Dave beat me on that one.
Communication skills. Yeah, if you want to unmute, you're welcome to do that too, whatever works. Dedication. The ability to pick up the phone. Yeah. Accountability. Desire to be part of a team. Willing to be flexible. Team player. Collaboration. Communication. Driven. Self-starter. Thank you. Customer service. We all have different skills where we go, actually, I think these 5 skills, whatever those are the skills that we need from our employees. And that's a way that we can unite around generations, not focus on, okay, so you do this and you only stay this amount of time. What skills can we develop that will serve us all as a company? Interest in learning on that. Thank you, Larry. Yeah, absolutely. If you haven't read it, I would suggest reading The Ideal Employee by Patrick Lencioni. He talks about employees being hungry, humble, and smart. And those are the 3 drivers that he really thinks are key to the ideal employee. Hungry, humble, and smart. Patrick Lencioni. So yeah, you can't take yourself too seriously. I did see that, Tara. That's an important skill, I think, for sure. Good. Awesome. So let's talk a little bit more about then and now pieces. This comes into play with technology. It comes into play with remote work. So we used to have a water cooler. We would gather around, we'd chat. Maybe you were in an organization where you had a cafeteria. You could go down to the cafeteria and talk to people. And now we're on remote screens. We're doing video conferencing for a lot of us, or it's limited exposure in an office with a mask. And so then now becomes really a challenge for us, where we're trying to figure out, how do I open up lines of communication that used to happen at the water cooler? For some people, it's Slack. For some people, there's different internal pieces and teams that you can use. Then there also comes to the technology piece. And Tara had asked about this earlier, like there's this technology difference. If you think about the technology that we embraced growing up, that was kind of our preference. So baby boomers had a Rolodex and they had the phone and they called people and they were comfortable with that skill set. Gen Xers were the first generation with email. And so email is kind of the primary thing that they default to. Plus it allows us not to interrupt other people in their job. So we email rather than bop over to their cube, or hopping on a Slack line for that piece of things. Then you get to younger generations and they used a phone, but they didn't use it actually to talk to people. They used it to text one another. So we have preferences. Our customers have preferences. And so we have to be thinking about, how can I be adaptable and serving both our employees and our customers? And that requires a lot of work on our part, because we've got to reach out in multiple ways. So those are all pieces to think about. So I want to open it up here because I know this is a big conversation point. So other thoughts along the lines of technology, the water cooler versus remote thinking? What are some things that are bouncing through your heads right now?
We still have a water cooler.
Do you? Nice. Love it. Kristen said she doesn't like listening to voicemail. Yeah, there's a lot of people who are like, don't leave a message. I saw you called. I'll call you back. Yep. Good. Other thoughts? How is this impacting your workplaces?
We're trying hard to embrace Zoom as a tool and not a hindrance in our communication with our clients. It's actually become a really great step in our process. So, you know, a lot of people do have Zoom fatigue for sure, but it's actually been a great asset for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking about technology differently rather than a pain in the butt that we have to tolerate. Actually, this is going to save us a lot of travel time, or it's going to help us get that first step of work done. Then we meet with the client. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that was actually just one of the things I was thinking about is when you look at it in the past, you know, if you had to travel to a meeting, you know, that could take up a large part of your day. Now you can just schedule them literally back to back to back.
Right, right. Which is in some ways more efficient and exhausting. Yep, all those. Yeah, thanks, Jim.
The company I work for now, Traffic Analysis and Design, has always been a work from home company. And I found this pretty interesting. We decided to lease a space for the first time so that a portion of us could work together face to face as needed. And I think it's been very well received.
Yeah, so there's a piece where even companies that are remote, that have really embraced being remote, are like, actually, there may be a component where there's benefit to us getting together. So, but we're rethinking it. It's not like we have a full office. We've got a space that people can come in and use the desk for a while or whatever that looks like. That's good. And there's a couple of comments in the chat box too. So Mick says a fair amount of message delivery is lost in email or texting. It is. So that can be part of the challenge. If that's a culture piece for you and you're really concerned about it, that becomes a non-negotiable. Like, we actually need to have phone calls, or we need to have Zoom meetings so that we see each other. You can make those pieces part of your culture. And Laura said, I love the convenience of technology. It's quicker, it's more efficient. Absolutely. Yeah. And then we're adding a piece on tone. That tone is really hard to read in email as well, or text. Totally. Yeah. There are challenges, for sure. There are challenges. I would encourage you to have conversations with your teams about what is expected when it comes to customers or clients as far as communication, and then internal team pieces. What are those internal team pieces that we have some expectations around? If it's this type of news, it really should be a phone call, or you should have a Zoom versus, you know, just a text message or an email. Those are all things that we think everybody understands, but common sense is not always common practice. So it's, from my perspective, making sure that everybody's on the same page and we're actually talking about it. That's important.
I have an attorney friend who told me a while back, he said, I ultimately hate email. And I'm like, why? And he said, because it's a perfect record of everything that has been communicated. And he said, I would much rather have people pick up the phone and talk, because you know, it's amazing what you can collect from email searches when you're doing depositions and so forth. So always something to consider with technology.
Absolutely. And we don't think about the fact, we think like, oh, our phones, they're not tracking text messages. There's all kinds of technology and capabilities, whether it be through email or social media. I was actually working on a project for a client, and I hopped on their social media, right, and checked things out. And it feels creepy. And at the same time, I went in with an advantage because I knew things about that person. Like, oh, I know they like horses and they like this, right? I had talking points. So it's interesting in that it serves us, but it can also really be a challenge from a legal perspective. Yeah. Good. Awesome. All right, with that, we need our 20 seconds to look away. So go ahead, take your pause, rest your eyes a little bit. Stretch if you need to. and that's our 20 seconds. It goes really fast, but it feels good to look away, doesn't it? Stretch a little bit. All right, so let's wrap up because we got about 20 minutes, and I want to make sure that we cover the coronavirus, the economy, millennials. So here's some things that we know already. There's been a lot of debt for millennials. 25% of them have been impacted by unemployment during this phase of COVID-19. It's impacting their retirement because it's a snowball effect. Like they're not able to save because they are unemployed and all that money is going into living costs. There's also a really strong sense of isolation that we're seeing for millennials and Generation Z. And what the impact is, we've seen a rise in depression and suicide, which is highly unfortunate. We're also seeing a rise of substance abuse and casual substance abuse as well as severe. So alcohol sales have been through the roof during this time for all generations on that front. And then the other thing we're seeing is it's impacting the housing market because a lot of younger people had not made the transition to houses and then all of a sudden went, oh, I'm sitting in an apartment and I'm working at home and I have 700 square feet and I have nowhere to go. So we've seen a rise in younger people buying homes at this point, something that until now they had avoided, but we're starting to see that impact because this is changing how they interact on that front. In addition, we're seeing an impact in Generation Z. So these folks are 23 and younger. And what we know about this group is they're really concerned about college debt. They had a lot of canceled job interviews and internships. They are walking into a workplace that is remote. So they're not even walking into a culture, learning it and walking away. Like they're entering the job place into a remote working situation. And they're also feeling very isolated. We have known for a long time that this generation is fiscally conservative, but this event on the economy is making them even more so. Like they are a generation of savers and they're going to find alternate ways of paying for things. Up to 50% of them reported that they had those canceled jobs and interviews and internships. We're seeing a rise in gap years and a rise of 2-year school programs because kids are saying, and young people are saying, I don't want to go spend that kind of money on tuition when it's going to be remote learning. So it's impacting our institutions greatly on that front. The other thing that we're seeing even more of is the gig economy. So the gig economy was big before. I'm coming in, I'm doing a contract job for you, and that's how I'll work with you. I'm not going to be your employee. We're seeing this younger generation go, this is my way of making money. So I've got to figure that out. So we're seeing the gig economy grow, especially with younger people. So that's a couple of things. I want to jump to Jennifer's comment. My daughter actually moved to a better and abandoned apartment in New York City, so she had more space on that front. Yeah, nice. Yeah, we're seeing those things. So we're just beginning to see the impacts of all of these components, but we will continue to see how this plays out for us. What are you seeing in your workplaces? I've seen some comments about switching to Zoom and things like that, but how else is COVID, the economy, impacting your work? What are you experiencing?
One thing I heard just yesterday is at least within our department, and we're typically kind of community affairs and referred to as external legislative affairs. They're basically looking at identifying which employees could be virtual indefinitely, which I knew we were looking at probably till mid 2021, but now they're basically saying we really don't need to have all this office space. Maybe we'll have one shared location where folks can gather occasionally, but sounds like that's ultimately going to be a pretty significant shift for us.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. And two things that I've heard along those fronts. So either your company is working more and more remotely, you need less office space, or for those that are working together, they need more office space because they need the 6-foot distancing, they need dividers. So it's kind of a give and take on that front, but people are definitely evaluating who needs to come back to our workplace, who doesn't. Good. We've got a couple of comments in there. Mick, unproductive time complying with emergency health orders, right? There's this piece of us that we're spinning our wheels, especially as leadership and management going, how do we do this? Like, what does this look like for us? I don't know. And it changes tomorrow. Francis said there's less engagement from volunteers with associations and nonprofits. I think, people are really struggling, like, how can I serve right now? What can I serve? I'm just trying to keep my head above water because I've now got a, fourth grader and a first grader that are at home and I don't know what to do. Dave adds in, it's generally difficult for salespeople, at least in their minds. Yeah, there's a struggle on that front. And that this makes, in my opinion, some of the training that we do more valuable. How do we actually grow a business? Rather than looking at the pandemic as everybody's dropped off the face of the earth, to looking at it as, oh, this is a way for us to revamp our services and reach out and serve people better. That's a different take on that, Dave. So you're right, switching that mindset's important. And then we've got a comment, much longer informal social time on internal Zoom or Teams. Yep, unproductive, inefficient for those who are doing okay socially. So I'm gonna add to that, what I think I'm hearing there, and correct me if I'm wrong, is sometimes we're forced into social things because people are like, hey, we're going to do a Zoom lunch, or we're going to do this, where some people are like, actually, I'm fine. And that could be a challenge. But there are definitely people who are struggling on that front. So good, that's it. Okay, perfect. Lots of impacts, lots of impacts. And one more comment on here, generally the team is more task or goal focused than people focused. Yeah, so there's this component right now, we're checking things off, not always checking in with people. So appreciate that. Yeah, for sure. Quick comments, right? Quick comments to solve the world's problems, but let's talk about a couple more impacts. Here's another huge impact on us right now, the election. What do we know about the election? So there's a 29 to 30% approval rating for Trump among millennials and Gen Z. That is the lowest by far out of all of the generations. So they are most critical of the current administration. 59% of millennials identify as slightly liberal to extremely liberal. So anywhere on that spectrum, it's almost 60% that say that they have liberal leanings. There is an increased government involvement piece, even among Republican youth, who are like, actually, we need to have more government intervention on these fronts, particularly when it comes to things like school shootings, when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to racial equity. There are pieces where they feel that we are not solving those problems and the government can help. And then across all generations, regardless of your generation, there's a really large number of moderates. There's people on those slightly sides of both the conservative and the liberal side, and the vast majority, it's like 65% of all generations would say, I'm moderate. So that's intriguing to think that it seems and it feels really extreme, but the majority of Americans are like, actually, I'm somewhere right in the middle on that front. But it does impact policy. So here's a little interesting history on this front of things. So if you go into William Strauss and Neil Howe and their original research around generations, they were kind of the originators of this piece. They've tracked generations for 1,500 years, and they've gone through and they've identified a life cycle. And the cycle is, we start with big government, and the government helps us fix things. So like World War II comes in and does Social Security and the CCC and different programs to help unemployment. And then from that cycle, there's a generation that builds out those institutions, which was baby boomers. And then a generation that comes in and goes, I'm not sure I buy this institutional thing, which is Gen X. And they start to deconstruct it and go, we need less government involvement. And then events happen where the next generation steps in and starts rebuilding those structures. So it's a 4-part cycle on that front. It's not new. Remember Socrates? It's not new under history. We're seeing this upswing right now in back to government involvement, and that's part of it. So good news, bad news, depending on where you stand on that. So I love being nerdy though, so that was your bonus nerdy info. All right, let's talk about bridging the gap. We've got about 10 minutes. Here's some questions that we all just need to ask. What stereotype do I need to look at differently? A lot of times our stereotypes are based on something that has happened in that generation's event that produced a characteristic. And that characteristic is not right or wrong, it's different. So we need to look at those stereotypes and question them and say, why do I see it as being entitled versus they really want to find their dream job? That's not a bad thing. We have to ask, what are we doing well in this process? What do we need to evaluate? Ultimately, how can I involve everyone in this discussion? Because if it's a discussion in my head or with just my leadership team and I'm not involving other people, I'm not getting all of the perspectives. So we want to get everybody involved in this conversation and discussion. And we need to understand what's coming up next, not just about millennials, because we talk about all young people being millennial, but we've got this Gen Z group coming in. So what we know about them, they were raised by Gen X parents. They tend to be more realistic and less optimistic. So more realistic, less optimistic, but they're also more independent. In addition, they entered the full-time workforce this last year. So we're starting to see them come in. They're about 25% of the overall population. Technology for this group is a necessity. 40% of them said that working Wi-Fi is more important than working bathrooms. Okay? Working Wi-Fi more important than working bathrooms. 79% of them have said, I experience tech withdrawal when I'm kept from my personal device. So when it comes to policies around phones and feeling like we have a no phone policy, well, the reality is almost all of us check our phones at some point during the day for a quick message. But this group has actually, there's ties to endorphins and feelings of reactions of like, oh, like there's a text message. They've recorded increases in endorphins when that happens for them. So it's interesting that we're seeing some brain changes. And then they also have bring your own device pieces. So especially if you're a government agency, that can be a challenge. Why would I have two devices? It doesn't make any sense. Well, because we have an open records policy, because we have these legal concerns. That's something that we're pushing back on though, and we're seeing less and less of separation on that line with younger generations. Then there's this other piece where they're really selective. Gen Z is really selective about where they share their private information online. This is kind of the new DARE program. Rather than a fight against drugs like it was for millennials, this is a fight against social media as far as sharing too much private information. And they're drawn to platforms that limit their long-term footprint. So it's Snapchat and Secret and Whisper, different things that allow something to flash up on the screen and then go away. Not, again, that it's not trackable. However, it gives less trackability on that front. Education-wise, this group says 75% of them believe that you can get a good education outside of college. So especially with remote learning, there's this piece of like, actually, I want to go into trades because I'm going to make money and I'm going to have less debt and it's going to be more immediate. And then on-the-job training for this group, we want to be thinking in terms of YouTube and videos, on-demand resources. They do want some formal training opportunities, but most of them, 70% of them, watch YouTube daily, if not all day on that front. And so there's just this component of video is the way to go. So if you're trying to figure out like, how do I engage this next group? Video is significant for them versus written pieces. We think of policies and manuals, and it may be an online video vault that we send them to instead of a binder somewhere on that front. So just different things to think about. And then who comes next? That's the big question. Who comes next? There are all kinds of names. It's always a battle to figure out who gets to name the next generation. So they're being called Gen C for coronavirus, coronials, quarantines, and baby zoomers. Those are all kind of names that are throwing out there. My guess is they'll become Gen C just because it's easier and it follows the pattern so far, but we'll see what comes up. So lots of information. We did not create world peace in an hour, but we did talk about ways that we can come together over the generations and unite as opposed to dividing ourselves. We all want the same things from our work. We want to be respected, we want to be valued, we want to make a difference, we want to serve people well. If we focus on those things versus what takes us apart, we'll find that we actually can offer the world up to those around us. So that's our intent, is to be able to serve our clients and our customers really well through this process. If you'd like to follow any information out there, this will be provided to you. We'll provide the PDF of the slide deck and you can see that. You can connect with me on Facebook, LinkedIn. You can take a picture of this before I change it if you want, but just let me know if you want to connect. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Kristen, who's going to give us more information here. And I know I've got 3 minutes, but I just want to say, I'm open to sticking around. If you have questions, I will stick around for a little bit, let me know. And thanks for letting me hang out with you today. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Just a quick thank you to our sponsors, TDS, H. Kruger, Park Bank, and Madison College. I did pop up to future events that one of them is tomorrow. So when we talk about that social engagement, if you're hungry for people, I would encourage you to check out FaceTime tomorrow. So that's our virtual networking session that we're doing. It's tomorrow at 2 p.m. And then our next event after that will be Get Moving Middleton on September 3rd. And Mayor Brar is going to be doing a State of the City for the city of Middleton. So thank you to Sarah for taking time and doing this. Thank you to all of you for being here. And like Sarah said, we're happy to stay on and take a few last questions here. Otherwise, enjoy your day and thanks for being part of the chamber.
Have a great morning, everyone. Good to
Thanks,
see you.